Hi, this is TheHande, and welcome to another video where I discuss some of my favorite video game characters. So, one group of characters that I have not really come to discuss is actually villains or antagonists from various video games. And so today, just like in the previous two videos, I'll be showcasing four of my favorite video game villains. Now, just a little note here at the beginning, I will not be mentioning some all-time classics like Bowser, Dr. Wily, or LeChuck from the Mario, Mega Man, and Monkey Island series. And the reason is pretty simple because these are what I would consider kind of very tropey villains, and I don't think there's anything wrong with there being a tropey villain. I mean, sometimes you just need a classic bad guy in order to get the game going. But because of that, they're obviously just not very interesting to talk about. And this is why I decided that if I'm going to talk about video game villains, I'm going to pick some characters who maybe have a little bit more depth and interesting levels to them. So our first villain of the day is, in my view, by far the most evil of today's antagonists, and that is Domino from Grim Fandango. Now, some of you might be a bit surprised by this because Hector LeMans is the actual main villain of the game. And yeah, Hector is pretty fucking twisted in his own way. Those of you who have never played Grim Fandango, it takes place in the Land of the Dead, where people go after they die, and have to spend 4 years working off their time before they're allowed to go to the ninth underworld, which is the Land of Eternal Rest. But especially pious souls can actually get a ticket on the number 9 train, which allows them to bypass the 4-year journey. And Hector LeMans' plan in the game is to basically just steal other people's number 9 tickets in this kind of vain plan to hopefully maybe get into the Land of Eternal Rest, although it's not even entirely clear if this plan could actually work, which makes Hector's plan that much more sinister and evil. But the thing is, Hector was obviously a very evil man when he was still alive, so his evil plan is sort of just a natural follow-up that even in the afterlife he's trying to do some sneaky evil business. Which doesn't really explain why Domino goes along with it. I mean, Domino, just like the game's main character Manny, also has some obvious baggage left over from their time when they were alive. But it's shown that Domino is actually a very capable salesperson. I mean, that is his job, and that is the way he is working off his time in the Land of the Dead. But Domino doesn't even seem to be particularly interested in getting a number 9 ticket and getting out of the Land of the Dead, which honestly just highlights just how entirely morally corrupt he is. He doesn't even seem to care about what Hector is doing, but rather just views everything like a business proposition. And yeah, this is why I think Domino really is the truest evil character in the game. And let's face it, we all wanted to punch Domino in the face. Hector I wouldn't want to touch with a 50-foot pole. Now, the next antagonist is Pius Augustus from Eternal Darkness Sanity's Requiem. Now, what makes Pius interesting, of course, is that he's actually a character that you actually get to play as in the very first chapter of the game. And then, after that first chapter, Pius basically becomes an avatar for one of the 3 ancient gods who are kind of like the primary antagonists in the game: Zelatath, Ulioth, and Chaturga. Now, it's already interesting that the player's actions basically decides who your opponent in the game actually is. But what's even more interesting, I think, is just how Pius is corrupted by the magic of these evil gods. Because at the start, Pius actually comes off as a pretty noble and steadfast warrior. I mean, he's a Roman centurion after all. But as the story goes on, not only does he become like a pretty powerful undead sorcerer, he also uses subterfuge and all kinds of schemes against the other protagonists in the story. So he goes from being actually a pretty decent guy to being a kind of an ultimate evil, which is honestly really, really disturbing when you stop to think about that. And that's kind of why I've always loved Augustus. As disturbing as the ancient evils in Eternal Darkness are, I think Pius is actually, the villain that I find the most scary. Next up, the only female villain in this video, which is Tavion from Jedi Knight Jedi Academy. Now, this one might not be so well known because Jedi Academy was kind of like the final death knell of the Jedi Knight franchise. But basically, Tavion is the henchwoman of the villain of the previous Jedi Knight game, Dasan, she goes up against the main character of the earlier Jedi Knight titles, Kyle Katarn, gets defeated, and is almost killed by Kyle until she reveals a very important piece of information that spares her life. Now, what I find interesting about Tavion, and I think honestly, I think it's unfair that she never really enters a discussion of like the greatest Star Wars secondary villains or anything like that, because despite being spared by Katarn in the game, this does not put her on the path towards the light side in the Star Wars series, but rather it motivates her into trying to orchestrate Katarn's downfall, because being spared by Katarn is really like the ultimate insult to Tavion, who is like one of the purest Siths that you can see in this entire game series. Tavion's plan basically entails turning one of Katarn's apprentices, Rosh, to the dark side in order to get Kyle to be morally crushed by this failure. Which is pretty goddamn insidious if you think about it. I just love the fact that Tavion is the kind of character who takes a defeat from an earlier game and actually turns it into her motivation to keep going after the heroes in the game. And it's only maybe slightly unfortunate that her downfall at the end of the game is because ultimately she gets possessed by the spirit of an ancient Sith Lord and then dies. And lastly, our most morally ambiguous antagonist, which is Baron von Glauer from the second Gabriel Knight game, The Beast Within. This is the FMV one that involves werewolves. And yeah, Baron von Glauer is a werewolf. And earlier in the story of this game, he's also infected a guy called Von Zell with werewolvism, or lycanthropy. And Von Zell has gone off killing people, thus attracting the attention of Gabriel, who is set on the case of the werewolf killings. Now, just as an aside here, while the Gabriel Knight games are supposed to be like supernatural mysteries and everything, it is never a mystery who the bad guy is because whenever Gabriel presents these characters with any sort of incriminating evidence, they always do something super suspicious. Von Glauer is not an exception. Von Glauer is an exception, however, because I'm not entirely sure what his plans or long-term goals in the game are. In fact, the only thing that I always take away from The Beast Within is that he apparently just really, really likes Gabriel and really badly wants to turn him into a werewolf so that they can be werewolf buddies together. I mean, it's not even subtle. Like, Von Glauer is pretty obviously gay, or at least bi. Because the way he allows Gabriel to join the Hunt Club in the game, like, there's barely any introduction there. I'm honestly surprised that the queer crowds are not just, like, fawning over this particular game. But then again, it's a point-and-click game from the mid-90s, so that's probably why. And it's only when Von Glauer is, like, forced to transform into a werewolf against his will in the end game where he even, like, exacts any kind of violence towards Gabriel, which is also kind of interesting. So yeah, that's why I kind of like Von Glauer, because I'm not even fully sure if he's actually evil. So those were at least some of my favorite villains from video games. I may do a follow-up video to this one, the same way I did to the other favorite video game characters video. So, who is your favorite video game villain? Leave it in the comments down below. I'm TheHande Mäkinen. See you on the next one.